Chapter 181. Tarns has a brilliant idea. Exarion II waited until everyone else had left before he calmly asked, "You saw Sauron appear in Mordor with your own eyes?" Although he addressed the group, his gaze fixed on Higher. The ranger's son had been nervous ever since meeting the regent. Under that stern look, he felt even smaller. He glanced instinctively at Tarns and answered, "Yes, my father and I both saw him, especially Lord Tarns. He confronted Sauron himself and managed to get away." Tarns bristled inwardly at the word "got away." That was a tactical withdrawal, he thought. Sauron didn't pursue me personally. He didn't even send the ringwraiths, only ordered orcs to chase me. He raised an eyebrow at Higher, who immediately worried he'd misspoken. Exarion Sig seemed pleased with the report. Smiling, he said, "Young men often aren't careful with their words. I do not believe the Lord of the Golden Tree is as Higher described." He let the remark pass, then grew serious. "Since you all witnessed Sauron's return, this news is of grave importance to Gondor. I must summon the kings of the human realms, as well as the elves and dwarves, to inform them." Tarns frowned. The regent had spoken a lot, but had not answered Tarns's unspoken question. He asked again, "So Gondor's first step is merely to call a council of kings to discuss how to deal with Sauron?" Exarion Sec shook his head, smiling. "Of course not. I will increase patrols around Minas Tirith to protect the people and to prevent orcs from slipping out of Mordor. Gondor will also provide more material support to the Black Gate so that Talion and the Rangers can hold the line without running short." He waved toward the stone table laid with food and wine. "Now, let us enjoy these delicacies. Lord Tarns has traveled a long way. You must not have tasted Gondor's fare." With that, Exarion plucked a bunch of plump purple grapes, popped a few into his mouth, and nodded with satisfaction. "That was it?" Tarns watched him, puzzled. Higher clearly wanted to press the point further, but seeing the regent eating contentedly, he kept silent. Noticing Tarnis's expression, Exarion's II dabbed at his mouth with a red velvet napkin and asked, "Why aren't you eating? Don't you like it?" Tarns's brow tightened. "Beyond this, does Gondor have any other plans, Your Excellency?" "This is already Gondor's greatest support," the regent replied easily. Tarns glanced at Higher, who looked torn about speaking up, and then pressed on calmly. "What Talion and his men need most isn't supplies. They need soldiers. I've been to the Black Gate. It is vast. Before Sauron's reappearance, the Rangers barely held the line. Now, with Sauron showing himself, orc attacks will increase. Talion and his men can't hold out indefinitely." Higher nodded fervently, his anxiety plain on his face. Exarion Tech was silent for a moment, then, still composed, said, "I understand your concern, Lord Tarns, but as I said, Gondor will provide ample supplies to the Black Gate. Beyond that, we cannot spare more help." Disappointment passed over Hire's face, though he quickly tamped it down out of respect. Tarns didn't react with anger. He only asked, steady and deliberate, "May I ask why?" A man chosen to govern Gondor surely understands the Black Gate situation. If you still refuse to send troops, there must be some compelling reason. The regent looked taken aback. "I am surprised you are not angry. Gandalf told me you were a decisive man, the sort who acts before he speaks. I expected you to be more impulsive." Tarnis shrugged and let a small smile show. "Anger solves nothing, Your Excellency. And I'm sure Gandalf didn't tell you I like to weigh things carefully before moving. I came here to solve problems, not to create them." The regent smiled at the jest. Tarns added lightly, "Unless solving you would solve Talion's problems." The smile drained from Exarion's face as naturally as if something cold had flowed through him. Tarns noted the change and immediately softened his tone. "Just a joke. I'm grateful you granted an Edwaith to the Golden Tree. I would never betray Gondor." Exarion II forced a smile and shifted the conversation. "The reason we can only give supplies is simple. Our forces are engaged fighting Mordor's enemies elsewhere. We cannot spare additional troops." He looked at Higher then, and for a brief moment the formal mask slipped. "I know your father and your people have paid dearly to hold the Black Gate for Gondor. I am sorry, but this is all I can do." Higher felt a flicker of flattered pride at the apology, but Tarns was already thinking ahead. "If the problem is only manpower, I may have a way to fix it," he said, "but I'll need Gondor to support the Golden Tree as fully as you support the Black Gate." Exarion Seker's brow tightened. He knew the Golden Tree's lands and people were small, perhaps a third the size of Minas Tirith. Tarns is also a sorcerer, he thought. Perhaps some magic could make up for the numbers. He fell silent and waited for Tarnas to explain. Tarns considered the plan quickly in his head and then said, "Give me at most 2 months." The regent nodded readily. "No problem. It will take me some time as well to summon the kings." Chapter 174. The Rodel Legion. 2 months later, just as the human kings were preparing to march toward Gondor at the news of Sauron's return, Tarnas finished his plan. It was a simple plan. The Golden Tree needed more soldiers, and the Black Gate was spawning an endless tide of orcs every day. Tarnas would turn those orc souls into soul runes that could summon troops for the Golden Tree. The more orcs died, the more soldiers could be summoned, until there were no more souls left to harvest. The only real problem was distance. The Golden Tree and the Black Gate were too far apart. Solving that was the point of Tarns's 2-month request to the Regent of Gondor. He would return to the Golden Tree, then use the portal technology he had employed before when the Red Lion Legion moved swiftly to Lake Town, and establish an anchor at the Black Gate. After his meeting with the Regent, as he helped Melina into Torite's saddle, he told the worried Dihire that reinforcements from the Golden Tree would arrive within 2 months and that Talion and his men only had to hold on until then. Dihire's face relaxed a little. Tarnas's words gave him the courage to report the situation to his father. So when Tarnas and Melina appeared on the barren plain outside the Black Gate 2 months later, both Talion and Dihire breathed with relief. Perhaps that was the power of being called a wizard. Tarns climbed the gate and quickly saw how things had changed. The Rangers were no longer relaxed. Their faces showed the exhaustion of constant fighting and the hollow numbness of men who had no time to mourn the fallen. Talion's forehead was furrowed with new lines. Gray threaded through his once dark hair, and his leather armor carried the marks of countless sword strikes and old, dried black orc blood. For a long moment, no other figures appeared outside the gate. No relief army, no riders on the horizon. Only wind and sand moved. Talion noticed Tarnas had only Melina with him, and overwhelmed by the sustained orc assaults, asked, "Lord Tarns, is it just you and Miss Melina?" Tarns lifted a heavy package from the saddle and whistled for Toretta to return. Meeting Talion's expectant look, he didn't dodge the question. "Don't worry, Talion. Support will arrive at the Black Gate by my sorcery." Melina added calmly, "Lord Talion, Tarns has never broken a promise to a friend. You can trust him. Do you think he would deceive you?" Talion flushed with apology. "I didn't mean." Tarns waved him off. "I know. You haven't seen the sorcery yet, so it's natural to doubt when there's no army in sight. Now let's get to work. See what I'm carrying? This will solve the Black Gate's problem. Is there a bit of open ground? We'll need the space." Talion found a relatively clear stretch of wall. Tarns noticed the thin layer of dust and the signs that the spot had once been used by rangers for training and rest. Those men had died defending the gate, and their families had moved elsewhere to avoid reminders of their loss. "Use this place," Talion said. "It won't cause trouble." Tarns grew serious. "From now on, don't tell anyone about what you see here. Understand?" He added, almost casually, a false detail to ensure secrecy. "This sorcery has a limitation. If too many people know of it, its effect will be weakened. For your family's safety and the Black Gates, you wouldn't want it to fail, would you?" Taken by Tarns's intensity, Talion nodded. "I won't speak of it." With Melina's help, Tarns fixed the stone tablet portal securely to the wall. He murmured the method his master Selen had taught him and channeled his magic. The portal flared to life in a pulse of stardust-like light, and then a silver-armored figure stepped through. Bernal. The portal glowed on, and Egon and Millicent followed. Behind them streamed the Golden Legion of the royal capital, Leyndell, Rodel knights in golden armor, bearing long spears and tower shields, marching in disciplined ranks. Rodel soldiers came after them, each equipped with a keen King's Army straight sword and a sturdy brass shield. More soldiers poured through until 2 towering, gold-clad knights, nearly 4 meters tall and seated on enormous warhorses, came last. Only then did the portal's light fade. 2 months earlier, the orc souls Tarns had collected at the Black Gate had been used to summon warriors who answered to Lendel. For holding a city, no force was finer than the Rodel Legion, and now their banners flew over the Black Gate. Chapter 183, Talion the Confused. The spot Talion had chosen quickly filled with troops from the Rodel Legion. The portal kept flashing, and men poured through until the place was crowded. Despite the narrower streets compared with the broad avenues of Lendel, the Rodel soldiers did not break rank. Under the orders of the Rodel Knights, they formed up with disciplined precision, arranging themselves into units and taking their places. Tarns gave Talion a reassuring look. "I've sent an elite 1,000-man legion from the Golden Tree territory as support," he said. "You shouldn't need to worry about the Black Gate now." Talion watched the soldiers, armor clinking, weapons at the ready, and let out a long breath of relief. "Honestly, even 100 would have helped," he said. 100 would have eased a lot of pressure." Tarns raised an eyebrow. "Is the Black Gate that strained? Are the ringwraiths leading those orcs?" Talion shook his head, his face creased with bitter sadness. "No, ever since your clash with Sauron, the ringwraiths are gone, vanished. But the orcs have gone feral. They assault the Black Gate day and night without cease. They're not particularly skilled fighters, but they overwhelm you with numbers. The rangers at the gate are few. Our lines have been stretched thin, and in the beginning, we lost many comrades because we didn't yet understand the orcs' tactics. We learned quickly, but there were no reinforcements to spare, and more of my men died holding the line. If Gondor hadn't shipped us arrows, lamp oil, and other supplies, I don't know how long we'd have lasted." Tarns was silent for a moment, mourning the loss of Talion's comrades, then patted his shoulder. "When I met the regent, I pushed him to send soldiers from Gondor to help defend the Black Gate. He wouldn't commit troops." Talion managed a weary smile. "I know. Dihire told me. It's not anyone's fault. Gondor is stretched thin fighting dark forces elsewhere, just as the regent said. Even so, he supplied us with a lot of material, the kind of quality that shows his intention. That does a great deal." Tarns looked curious. "Why is Gondor the only one resisting those constant incursions? What are the other human kingdoms doing?" Bernal, standing nearby, snorted. "What else are they doing? Hiding under the behemoth that is Gondor and keeping warm. And the regent isn't about to hand his borders to anyone he doesn't trust. There are politics. How many troops each nation should send, whether they're elite or just cannon fodder, how much Gondor would have to pay every year, whether sending their forces would risk leaving their own borders open. It's a nightmare of issues. Better to avoid it, from their point of view." Talion returned Bernal's salute, a ranger's greeting, then glanced back at Tarns, silently asking for the strangers' names. Tarns understood and introduced them: Bernal, Egon, and Millicent. When Talion heard the names, his eyes lit up. "You three were the ones from that dragon slaying? Bernal the swordsman, Egon the divine archer, and Millicent the swordswoman." Tarns blinked at the grand titles and looked at Bernal and the others in surprise. Bernal rubbed his forehead with a dry sigh. Millicent looked amused. Only Egon laughed. "Ha! Those are bard-blown titles. Thorin had a bard compose a poem to celebrate our journey to the Lonely Mountain. The dwarves loved it, the elves put their own flourish on it, and there you go, fancy names." Talion nodded eagerly. "I heard your tale from the same bards, Sir Bernal, who fought and slew ringwraiths, Sir Egon, who never misses, Lady Millicent, who wields a sword like a dancer. I've long admired heroes like you. I never expected to meet you all here." Relief spread over him. "I didn't expect Tarnas to call you in to help at the Black Gate. That makes me feel a lot better about what those orcs might do." Tarns smiled. He had deliberately summoned names the people would trust. He'd thought about calling a couple of roundtable knights from Lendel, but those newcomers lacked renown in this world. Even if capable, some might question their value. Among the famous was General Radon, the demigod who had struck down Smaug, but Tarns needed Radon at home for emergencies, so he left him in the Golden Tree territory. He wanted proven reputations on the field, and Bernal and his companions fit the bill. After Talion's praise, Tarns took a moment to explain the trio's true titles in the lands between. Egon and Millicent's names were straightforward, but Bernal's title, the Pretender, brought a puzzled look to Talion's face. Tarnas and Bernal noticed the confusion and clarified at once. In my land, Tarnis said, only the strongest becomes king. The title Pretender marks those powerful enough to have had a shot at the throne. It means their strength is almost kingly. It's not about treachery. Bernal shrugged. Yeah, anyone who wants that rotten job can have it. Seeing Tarns so busy, I'm not eager to wrestle him for it. And I never took the name because I had designs on the throne. Before he finished, a young man burst over, panting. He looked like Talion and hurried toward them, alarm written on his face. Talion's son, Dehire. He skidded to a halt before the golden standard of the Rodel Legion and gasped. The orcs are attacking again. Tarns and Bernal exchanged a quick, knowing look. The Rodel Legion would soon have work to do. Chapter 176, The Battle of the Black Gate, Part 1. In the afternoon, the Black Gate fortress on Mordor's border brooded in shadow like a great beast crouched on scorched earth. The air reeked of sulfur and rot, a constant assault on the rangers' nostrils that made them frown. Worse, a vast orc army crowded the approach below the gate. The noise from the massed ranks tore at the air. Sauron's forces spread across the barren plain like boiling black tar, filling the landscape to the smoke and dust-hazed horizon. The ground trembled. Even atop the high walls, the vibration could be felt. Coarse beast hides and rusty iron armor scraped together. Axes and blades flashed with a cruel light, and ugly, savage faces bore naked hunger for blood. "How are things, Beckett?" Talion hurried up and asked the ranger captain on duty. Tarns, Melina, and Bernal followed close behind him. Tarns had a faint memory of this young captain. Beckett had been sitting near the traitor when Tarns had helped Talion capture him. But the months since had been hard. The once lively man now wore worry lines in his forehead and gray stubble on his chin. He had aged 10 years. The losses of comrades and the steady orc assaults had left their mark. Beckett glanced at Tarns and his companions, then answered hoarsely, "It's bad. These orcs aren't holding back. Both their numbers and their quality are worse than before. There are Uruks and Olug hulks, things we rarely saw here before." He pointed out formations among the orcs that looked larger and more organized than the common grunts. Tarns was about to speak when Egon's old, sharp voice cut in. He scoffed up at the sky. "They're getting restless. Look, 3 ringwraiths are riding in that cloud." Talion and Beckett looked up in surprise. Even squinting and bringing telescopes to bear, they saw nothing. Egon waved them off. "Don't strain your eyes. They must have noticed me glance up and tuck themselves back into the cloud." Beckett started to question him, but when he remembered Egon had come with Lord Tarns, he softened his tone. "How did you spot them?" Egon laughed out loud. "I looked up and saw them. They probably saw me looking, and that's why they hid." Beckett's astonishment lingered, but Talion leaned in and murmured to him, "Lord Tarns brought members of the Lonely Mountain Expedition. The one who just spoke is Egon the Deadeye. Tarnis calls him Egon the Dragon Warrior. And the man in silver with golden eyes is Lord Bernal. You wanted to meet the one who held his ground against several ringwraiths." Talion gave Beckett a quick squeeze. "Now's no time for introductions. Lord Tarnis has brought troops of the Golden Tree with him, using his glintstone magic. You'll have a chance to speak when duties are handed over." Beckett stole a few more glances at Bernal, then turned back and gave Talion a firm nod. Bernal, watching the restive orc host, spoke up before anyone else could. "With ringwraiths around, you must guard against their aura. Even the strongest warrior can falter in an instant. A shaken mind gives up, and the soldier loses his fighting edge." "We've faced ringwraiths before," Talion replied. "Not as many or as famously as Lord Bernal, but we've learned to keep our composure. Trust us, we won't crumble and hold you back." Bernal shook his head. "No, you misunderstand. I mean to cast a certain prayer, glintstone magic for your rangers. It will grant them protection from ringwraith interference, so they won't have to waste strength resisting it." He nodded toward Tarns. "This glintstone rite was taught to me by Tarns. He will perform it with me for you." Tarns glanced at Bernal. He knew Bernal did not relish the idea of baptizing so many rangers alone and had found a clumsy excuse to rope him in. Bernal returned the look with a brief wink. His presence would make the men more receptive to the Golden Tree's prayers. Melina added softly from behind Tarns, "Bernal means the Golden Tree's blessing, a branch of their prayers. I can help share the work." Tarns inclined his head. Then I'll trouble you. Egon, always watchful, interrupted. The orcs are starting to move. The assault is about to begin. We don't have time to dawdle. Tarnis drew a breath. Talion, have the ranger who knows the Black Gate best go with Egon to Riddell's force. Tell them where the fortifications and weak points in the wall are. Talion barked an order. Higher, you heard him. You know the Black Gate structure better than any of us. Go with Elder Egon and inform the reinforcements Lord Tarns brought. Yes, Higher answered, and went at once with Egon. Bernal frowned at the surging orcs. I'm afraid it may be too late to cast all the prayers now. These things march faster than the orcs we faced at the Lonely Mountain. Tarnas looked coldly at the gray-black tide below. I thought so. I believe these are the main force Sauron has been hiding and breeding. He planted his staff in his palm. As he gathered the glintstone power to buy time for the prayers, he told Melina and Bernal, I'll hold them off long enough for you to cast. Millicent, if the ringwraiths dare to swoop down on the walls, you take them. Millicent said nothing, but the scythe sword she gripped answered for her. Chapter 185, Battle of the Black Gate, Part 2. Push harder, you swine. Lord Sauron demands the Black Gate at any cost. If you die of exhaustion, die at the gate. An orc commander, perched on a snarling warg, cracked a leather whip across the backs of two already flayed Ologhai. The two great trolls strained, pushing a towering siege engine packed with mottled armored orcs. The bulk of the tower made every inch of movement a battle. The whip found flesh, the trolls howled, summoned the last of their strength, and the tower lurched forward a fraction. Before the commander could lash out again at the trolls, creatures he considered good only for eating, something roared above him. A shadow swept over him and the warg riders. He had time only to glance up before the wrecked siege tower collapsed and crushed him beneath splintered wood and smashed stone. Black blood oozed from the ruin as cerulean sparks faded from the shattered timbers. The anomaly seared the nerves of the orc leaders like a hot iron. "Wizard! Wizard!" croaked the first. An orc chieftain in patched iron and bearing a deep facial scar bawled like a broken bell, his ruddy yellow eyes flaring with fear and rage. He lifted a blood-smeared cleaver and pointed toward the battlements where the blue light had vanished, spittle scattering as he screamed, "There's a wizard on the Black Gate, that blasted glowing rat. Catapults, get them moving. Aim at the gate. Smash him. Smash the whole section down." His roar was a fuse. All along the front, orc commanders who'd seen the flash reacted with the same ugly unanimity. Pounding chests, rending cries, orders bellowed in harsh orcish dialects. "Catapults, fire at the top of the gate. Quick, kill that wizard. Don't let him glow again. Target where he stands. Flatten him." The commands infected the catapult lines in the rear, ramshackle machines of bone, rotten rope, and warped wood. The crews sprang into motion like whipped tops. Dim-witted trolls in leathern aprons grunted as overseers cursed and slashed with whips. Giant, grime-streaked hands hauled huge stones, each as large as 4 or 5 men, into the leather sling pouches. The ground squelched with each ponderous step, leaving deep impressions. Orcs at the winches bared crooked yellow teeth and heaved until coarse ropes sang under terrible tension. Others peered through slits and with crude gestures and hissing taunts lined up their aim toward where the blue light had burned. "Release!" A dozen catapult commanders shrieked in unison. With a thunderous whoosh, gigantic stones tore through Mordor's polluted air, climbing short, heavy arcs. Their shadows swept over the vanguard below. Orcs on the front line cheered, bared black-stained fangs, expecting the gate to shudder and the wizard to die. But on the battlements, the rangers of the Dundane, cloaked gray-green, stood like cold stone. No panic, no cowering, only watchful calm and a faint, almost imperceptible mockery as the huge stones fell. Boom! 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 The impacts hit the mud 40-50 meters short of the gate, not the black wall itself. The ground where they struck split into deep, jagged craters. Shattered rock and dirt flew out in all directions, and smoke and dust filled the air. The deafening thuds slammed into the open ground like a rebuke. The orcs' triumphant howls choked into silence. Mouths hung open, faces frozen in a ridiculous tableau as the stones thudded harmlessly away from their target. Tarns watched with a faint smile and said, "So their range really can't reach the Black Gate." Talian's face showed confidence, but his voice held the weight of long experience. I've fought these orcs for years. I know their catapult's limits and their nature. Attack them from range, and they'll respond with their own engines. Those brainless creatures saw your glintstone magic strike and assumed their catapults could reach us. Tarn shrugged and raised his staff again. His magic stores were still ample. Melina's presence and Bernal's prayers were nearly finished. He could keep weaving glintstone for a while longer. Talion, worried, sent trusted men to ride to Gondor with word that the Black Gate was under assault by Mordor's host led by the Ringwraiths and needed immediate reinforcement. Before the riders could leave, a shriek tore through the sky, an agonizing, soul-gnawing sound. Talion, shielded by Bernal's blessing of sorcery, felt only a sharp, unpleasant sting from it. He recognized the sound. The Witch King and his fellows above could no longer hold themselves silent. He snatched his bow from his back and barked, "Archers, ready for the sky!" From the roiling, darkened clouds, 3 ringwraiths slammed through on bat-like mounts and dove toward Tarns, who was at his work on the gate. Talion loosed arrows in a spray toward the diving figures. Tarns did not flinch. Glintstone light pulsed from his staff, striking siege towers and catapults and blowing apart the orcs' engines as they crept forward. Melina had slipped away for a moment, and Bernal knelt to complete his prayers, but there was still one constant protector at Tarns' side. Arrows were not enough. As Talion watched the winged wraiths close, a streak of crimson, quick as a snapped thread, caught his eye. Millicent moved with such speed she left after-images. Using the jagged bricks of the nearby watchtower as footholds, she sprang from terraced ledge to ledge. In moments, she was atop the highest turret, the wind whipping her crimson dress into a banner. She didn't hesitate. She swung her blade at the nearest twisted ringwraith, an entity wrapped in the scent of death, and a torrent of blade light poured from her strike. Chapter 186, Battle of the Black Gate, Part 3. Under a lead-gray sky, Millicent hung there like a crimson bud about to open. The scythe-curved sword in her hand felt like an extension of her arm, blazing into a torrent of golden light. The streaming blade formed a dense, deadly web aimed at the ringwraiths nearest her. The struck ringwraiths answered with soul-piercing shrieks, their black smoke and cursed blades frantically parrying to ward off Millicent's onslaught. Metallic clashes erupted in an instant. Sparks flew as crimson and black light tore through the air. The fell beast that bore the ringwraiths went wild from the impact. Its scaled head, rimmed with bony spurs, reared up, its gaping maw dripping corrosive saliva as it bellowed. Putrid hot breath sprayed toward Millicent, while razor claws swiped for her. Millicent's golden eyes took it all in with calm precision. Her dancer's movements shifted. Riding the momentum of her sword striking the enemy blades, she spun midair at a hair-raising angle, slipping past the beast's bite and claws. The golden blade light converged as if gripped by an invisible fist, and with a single merciless strike, it slammed into the creature's exposed throat, thick keratin and scales giving way beneath the edge. A sickening rip and crack echoed. Millicent cleaved through bone and muscle. A hideous fanged head spurted corrosive, foul blood and flew high into the air. The headless carcass went rigid. The beast's roars died, all strength ebbed away. The head and the headless bulk fell like 2 putrid mountains of flesh onto the stout black gate walls below. Talion, who had watched the duel from the ramparts, shouted up to the Dunedain on the wall, "Get out of the way!" There was a dull, heart-stopping boom as the body hit, then the wet, sickening sound of flesh and bone splattering. Black blood stained the stones and steamed. The black gate itself trembled only slightly, but the nearby Dunedain rangers, fresh from receiving the golden prayers, gasped and craned their necks to look up at the crimson-clad swordswoman in the sky. The ringwraiths that had ridden that beast were flung into the air by the death throes, shrieking with pain and fury. Black mist writhed around them, showing how grievously they'd been hurt. This ringwraith had never expected Millicent's skill to surpass that of the silver-armored swordsman who'd fought them at Lake Town. Worse yet, the blow had split its breastplate, its spectral form faintly showed within, and for a moment it lost control of itself, tumbling through the air like a shredded black kite. Millicent had no footing from which to pursue. It watched instead as the wounded wraith used its spectral nature to drift away. The other two ringwraiths, who had been stooping to attack Millicent and Tarns, saw how things had gone and beat their beast's wings, altering their dives. One streaked like an arrow toward its thrown companion, caught it before it struck ground, and hauled it back to the beast's back. The other pulled up in tight formation. Not long after, they both climbed into the dark clouds. They fled, in part because Tarns, having finished a spell of glintstone magic earlier, had turned his staff away from the siege towers and catapults and aimed it at them. From the Lake Town encounter, they all remembered how deadly that magic could be, how it had downed two ringwraiths. Seeing Tarns prepare, the three chose flight over fight. Tarns watched them vanish into the cloud-high sky, and whether they could hear him or not, let out a scoffing, "They run fast." Millicent floated down and landed as she had climbed, using the rough protruding bricks of the watchtower as leverage. Her movements were clean and sure. A few deft shifts to bleed off momentum, and she touched down, chest rising and falling barely. She came up behind Tarns, tightened her grip on her blade, and leaned close enough to whisper, "One of them's badly wounded. It won't be able to act for a while." Tarns inclined his head. "Thank you, Millicent. Well done." Melina had just finished bestowing the golden prayers on the last of the Dunedain and returned to Tarns's side. Bernal, having completed his blessings, went off toward the Rodel Legion to take up overall command and lead them in battle. Tarns looked down from the gate. While Millicent had been wrestling with the ringwraiths, he had used glintstone magic to destroy the catapults that posed the greatest threat to the Black Gate. He still felt residual magic within him, but he was wary. He did not know if Sauron was watching the field and dared not spend all his power recklessly. Even with a blue tearstone vial at hand to restore his store, refilling would take precious seconds. Seconds Tarns was not willing to risk. After speaking with Millicent, he produced the blue tearstone vial and drank to fully replenish his magic reserves, preparing for whatever might come. Talion waited for Tarns to finish and then turned to the clamoring orc host below. "I've sent scouts in groups to notify Gondor of our situation," he said heavily. "Hopefully, they'll send troops when they get the word." Tarnis thought of Gondor's regent and shook his head slightly. "I don't hold out much hope for troops," he said. "If they can send more supplies, that would be enough." Talion looked puzzled. "Even counting the reinforcements you brought, we have supplies to last 3 months. Why do you sound as if we'll run out fast?" Tarns shrugged. The regent had kept his promise and sent ample stores, so much that even if a few of the Dunedain sold some secretly, there would still be plenty. He cleared his throat. "I brought more than what's here, but how much support Gondor can spare will depend on how many orcs Sauron throws against us." He did not say the rest, the grim calculus that the more orcs that fell, the more souls Sauron could collect, and the more he could use his portals to pull armies from farther realms. Talion, hearing only Tarns's caution, took it more simply, that how much aid would arrive would match the scale of the enemy press. Chapter 187, Battle of the Black Gate, of 4. On the thick stone ramparts of the Black Gate fortress, the silence of Mordor had been torn to shreds by the clamor of battle. A black tide of orcs surged against the ancient walls. Crude siege ladders thudded and scraped as they were raised and hooked over battlements. Foul roars echoed, trying to batter down the stones. Even though Tarns had smashed the trebuchets and some of the siege towers, it was clear the enemy would not be deterred. The orcs poured on regardless of losses, one ladder after another borne on their shoulders toward the gate. The Dunedain rangers stationed there answered with ballista bolts, catapults, and every engine of war the walls could mount. The killing was terrible and precise, but Sauron's will was plain. The Black Gate must be taken. Corpses littered the ground, but more orcs simply stepped over them, using the dead as rungs to climb. For every minute a body fell, another climbed. For every wall held, dozens of orc lives were spent. The rangers' losses were almost negligible, and yet no one smiled. Their faces only grew harder, more solemn. The numbers of the enemy were beyond what the fortifications had been built to meet, and the defenders' weapons were being devoured by that suicidal tide. An old Dunedain veteran leaned against the cold parapet, his bow a blur in his hand. He drew, knocked, aimed, and loosed with the fluid, deadly economy of long habit. Pft. The strings sang as arrows found sockets and throats. One orc's eye socket split open, another's throat exploded beneath a shaft. In a few breaths, 5 bodies tumbled from the ladder on his section of wall and thudded into a twisted heap. Still the ranger's face never warmed. He reached for his quiver and felt only emptiness beneath his fingers, almost every fletching gone, one cold feather left. He glanced at the spare bundles stacked nearby. They, too, were dwindling. A young ranger came running with the last crate of arrows, distributing them with a face as grave as the elders. Everyone understood what the thinning quivers meant. Every arrow fired shortened the line that kept the orcs at arm's length. The rain of missiles might be thick now, but the supply could not hold forever. At another stretch of wall, several rangers shoved a great rolling log over the battlement. It found the ladder like wind and thunder, crushing 7 or 8 clawing orcs into splinters of bone and torn sinew. The ladder twisted and crashed, and the falling bodies took down those below, a cascade of limbs and shrieks. The men who had heaved the log couldn't linger to watch. Another cry rose from the parapet. "Quick! Over there! Another group's coming up!" They sprinted for the next supply point. There were only 2 logs left and a handful of stones. More supplies were being brought up as fast as the defenders could ask for them, but reinforcements of stores could not match the pace of consumption. A young supply runner, staring down at the seething mass of orcs who climbed over corpses and wreckage without fear, reported with a hoarse voice, "Captain, only 2 rolling logs left, not many stones. The logistics team isn't here yet." The squad leader glanced at his men and then at the unending tide below. He had seen how the orcs used their dead as raw material for assault. Through clenched teeth, he gave the order that mattered in that moment. "Never mind. Push this log, now." Further along, where the fighting had already become a brutal, close-quarters melee, the rangers had exhausted every log, stone, and arrow. Orcs had already hauled ladders to the wall and clambered up. A ranger slit an orc's throat with a clean scimitar stroke, then backhanded the hilt to smash the finger bones of another reaching for the parapet. He moved with the economy of a veteran, each swing, thrust, and parry deadlier than the last, and the pile of enemy corpses at his feet grew. Sweat beaded on his brow and slid into the blood on his cheeks. His arms trembled with fatigue. His lungs burned with every seizure of breath. He watched his comrades fight with the same hollowed look. All were seasoned veterans. In other battles, they knew how to conserve strength, how to kill efficiently. But bodies and spirits were not infinite. The orc army below roared and surged on, stepping over the charred and still warm bodies of its own. From the gloom far off, other siege towers and remnants of trebuchets could be seen moving forward through the cloud of smoke. The sight made even the hardened ranger's stomach go cold. An orc sprang up from a ladder, and the ranger, acting on instinct, struck for its neck. His weapon, slick and worn from endless use, slipped in his hand and flew uselessly over the parapet to clatter on the orc's body. He tried to recover with a kick, but his legs felt leaden. Exhaustion had anchored him in place. The cleaver came down in a rusted arc. The ranger shut his eyes and thought it was over. Then a deep battle cry rolled over the field, like thunder, like a breaking sky, rending his thoughts. He blinked and heard it again. "Rodel, advance!" The words struck him like a command and an oath. For a heartbeat, his mind cleared. Then light tore into the world, golden, blinding, filling his vision. Chapter 188, Battle of Black Gate. "Rodel, advance!" With that roar, the golden tide poured into the narrow wall passage like molten metal bursting through a dam. Heavy boots thundered, drowning out the orc's cries and shaking the black gate. Under the stunned gaze of the rangers, the Rodel Legion soldiers streamed up the passage like a moving golden bulwark. Clad in heavy armor, their massive tower shields locked edge to edge, digging into the stone floor. They formed an instant, impenetrable metal dam along the battlements. The orcs who had just climbed the wall stared at one another in bewilderment. No one had expected a shield wall to meet them at the top. "Hold! Push!" A steady, powerful command cut through the din. The formation advanced as one. The tower shields slammed into the freshly arrived orcs with bone-jarring force. The sickening sounds of crushed bone made teeth ache. Those not sent flying were skewered by long spears thrust through gaps in the shields. The orcs' rusted weapons only sparked briefly against the Rodel shields before being parried away or knocked from their grasp. Clang! Clang! Two Rodel knights, wearing even finer golden armor, produced smooth stones that glowed with a warm light. Seemingly casually, they tossed the stones onto the ground around them. As the warm stones touched the pavement, a golden aura washed over the rangers, restoring their stamina and sealing shallow wounds. The seriously wounded were quickly bandaged by comrades. The warm stones could not heal deep, broken bones, but they stabilized injuries and allowed slow recovery, enough to keep many from bleeding out. The ranger captain and several veterans had been least hurt. Feeling their strength returning, the captain rose and hurriedly led the veterans to assess their stretch of the Black Gate. Then he shouted to the two Rodel knights, Left flank breach. Orcs are setting up ladders. There's a climbing point below your left battlement." At once, one Rodel knight led a small flanking squad. Their heavy shield wall and deadly spears closed over the weak point the captain had named and drove the climbing orcs back down the face of the wall. The rangers, gasping, exchanged glances. They didn't know how the battle would go, but for the moment, they had survived. While that Rodel knight reinforced the flank, the other was not idle. A few veterans scrambled to elevated platforms at the rear of the Black Gate where they could see the orc host. One of them shouted to the captain, pointing at the densest cluster of orcs, "Captain, they're regrouping for a new assault. There's a makeshift trebuchet being reassembled down there." "And over here," another called, voice tight, "they're piling corpses to build a ramp. If they finish that ramp," the ranger captain said grimly, "they can set ladders up more easily. Our defense will be under far greater pressure." His eyes fell to the last two stone projectiles left on the battlement. "We still have projectiles," he decided. "We must stop them from finishing that ramp." A veteran hesitated. "What about the trebuchet they're building down there? If we throw both stones, our trebuchet will be useless." The captain blew out a breath. "If they finish the ramp, we'll be facing them in numbers several times our own. We'll use our trebuchet to bait theirs, make them show it. Maybe Talion is bringing reinforcements. Time's short. We act now to stop the ramp." The veteran nodded and signaled the others into motion. The Rodel knight beside the captain spoke up quietly. "I can deal with the trebuchet. The Rodels will stop the ramp." The captain looked up, surprised. Behind the knight's golden visor, his face was unreadable, but the gaze beneath it was fierce. The knight's right hand had closed around a holy sigil. Violent, golden lightning crackled over it, spitting hot ozone into the air. He intoned, "In the name of the golden tree and the ancient dragon." A spear of blinding golden lightning ripped through the murky sky above the Black Gate and struck the nearly finished trebuchet. Two more followed in quick succession. The knight hurled 3 bolts in all. Then, boom! Deafening explosions tore through the orc lines. The lightning incinerated the clustered attackers. Charred limbs and splinters of wood and stone erupted outward. The trebuchet's massive wooden frame shattered like kindling, burst into flame, and collapsed, crushing a number of orcs beneath it. But the danger was not over. As the wreckage broke apart, several thick timbers were flung free and tumbled down into the pile of corpses the orcs had been using as fill. One chunk lodged across the heap, forming an unintended support, exactly the sort of brace that could let the ramp take shape. The captain's face went pale. It wasn't the Rodel knight's fault. No one could have predicted that the collapsing trebuchet would create a brace for the ramp. The veterans reacted instantly. They aimed the 2 remaining stone projectiles at the large broken timbers and sent them tumbling down the gate. The stones crushed 2 of the supports, but one splintered beam remained lodged in the corpses. Like a swelling tide, orcs surged up that makeshift stair of bodies, trying to bypass the shield formation and force a breach from the flank. Chapter 189, Battle of the Black Gate. Seeing the tide of orcs pressing up the broken wooden ramp, the ranger captain first ordered the Dunedain, who could still move, to fire every arrow they had left at the attackers. Then, anxious, he turned to the Rodel knight beside him. "Can you still use that lightning sorcery, Your Excellency?" The Rodel knight shook his head. "Sorcery? You mean the lightning spear? My power is nearly spent, and another knight is holding the front line. Unless there are more Rodal knights or those trained in prayers, I will need to recover a little." The ranger captain did not quibble over the difference between prayers and sorcery. He seized on the last sentence. "How long?" "About 5 minutes. Then I can cast it again." Without hesitation, the captain answered, "My men and I will buy you those 5 minutes." He spun, and his hoarse voice, cutting through the din of battle, shouted, "Abandon ranged fire. Everyone, block the breach. Use blades and bodies to hold the line. 5 minutes. Hold for 5 minutes." The command was like a plunge into ice. The exhausted Dunedain rangers steadied themselves and obeyed without question. Those still able loosed their remaining shafts in a frantic final volley, aimed not at slaughter but at delay. The arrows turned the front ranks of orcs into pincushions and sent bodies tumbling, slowing the surge for a heartbeat. It was not enough. More orcs stepped over corpses, howling with rusted blades and axes, and pressed up the ramp toward the torn battlement. "For our comrades! For the Black Gate!" they roared. The ranger captain drew his scimitar and charged, cutting down the first orc that reached the wall. "Hold the line! Stand firm!" A single cry rose and spread. The surviving Dunedain, like moths to a flame, threw their last strength into forming a human dike at the junction where the ramp met the wall. They abandoned skirmishing tactics and braced themselves, shoulder to shoulder, to meet the impact. Chipped scimitars and rusted axes flew sparks. One ranger, his blade knocked away, shoved his shoulder into an orc shield and took an axe to the side so the man behind might deliver a killing blow. Blood slicked the bricks, making footing treacherous. When one fell, another hoarsely filled the gap, even using broken spears as improvised thrusting weapons or biting with bare teeth. 5 minutes stretched like an eternity. Every second was bought with blood. The Dunedain line, though battered, would not be broken. The Rodel knight who had spoken with the captain watched, briefly stunned by their resolve. Respect flared in his eyes. He leapt down from the battlement, drew a greatsword etched with the golden tree from his back, and with a heavy arm guard parried an axe aimed at a ranger beside him. A single backhand swing split the orc clean in two. "You need not die holding this for me," he said. His voice cut through the clash of steel. The golden, muscular figure of the knight planted itself like bedrock into the crumbling line, giving the Dunedain a chance to breathe and regroup. He glanced with regret at 3 fallen comrades, then cleaved a path through the surging orcs with steady strokes. Turning to a young ranger who had been stabbed in the abdomen, yet clung to an orc's leg long enough for others to finish it, he pronounced in a ringing voice, "By the golden tree, the courage of you Dunedain would move even the proudest of Rodel knights." At last, the 5 tortured minutes expired. The ranger captain hurled his now broken scimitar at an orc's head and drew the last dagger from his belt when a thunderous roar erupted behind him. He glanced back. The Rodel knight had fallen back a few paces to a safer spot. His raised right arm shimmered with crackling golden light, coalescing at last into a lightning spear as thick as a man's arm. "Retreat!" the knight roared and hurled the weapon. The lightning spear screamed through the air and struck the core of the broken log that formed the ramp. It did not merely shatter wood. The spear detonated the timbers as if they had been packed with powder. A blinding golden storm of flame and shrapnel tore into the ramp with a deafening roar. Orcs on the log were blown apart, torn into charred fragments, and hurled through the air. Dozens died in the flash. The blast left a smoking, blackened pit and a scatter of bodies. Splinters rained outward, maiming and blinding many more, snapping fingers and shredding faces. The long-held breath in the ranger captain's chest finally escaped. His shoulders sagged for a moment, and he wiped a smear of warm blood from his face. Before he could turn to thank the knight, a cold, gauntleted hand fell heavily on his shoulder. The Rodel knight's voice was steady, without relief. "Now is not the time for thanks or rest, brave Dunedain. The enemy is still coming." The knight's greatsword still dripped with black orc blood. His words struck like another bucket of cold water, snuffing out the fragile relief. The captain swept his gaze along the battered battlements, across gaps and scorch marks and down to the plain beyond. As far as the eye could see, it was the same despairing, churning, gray-black sea. The destruction of the ramp had been but a momentary eddy. More orcs surged at other siege ladders and climbing points. Some even began to scale the rough face of the wall with bare hands. Far off, through smoke on the horizon, even larger formations were moving forward like a shadowed tide. The battle at the Black Gate had only just deepened. Chapter 190, The Battle of the Black Gate, Part 7. Talion, posted atop the main gate of the Black Gate, was in a slightly better state now. Tarns and Melina had taken on a heavy share of the defense. Tarnis's strength was no surprise to Talion. He had long known the Rodel commander's prowess. It was the quiet girl who had trailed Tarns that impressed him most. Melina couldn't match Tarnis in killing speed, but her healing sorcery was extraordinary. Wounded Dunedain rangers with non-fatal injuries were mended at once, and those who should have bled out but hadn't yet were dragged back from death by her spells. With her, the rangers' casualty rate had fallen sharply. Tarns cut down the last few attacking orcs near the gate, his armor splattered with blood, then stepped over to Talion. "The orcs' numbers are enormous," he said. "Can the Black Gate's supplies hold out?" Talion gazed at the sea of orcs beyond the walls, drew a steadying breath, and answered, "Gondor's reserves are enough, but we don't have enough hands to move them from the warehouses fast enough. The front is stretched too thin for the transport teams. They're being pulled into defense." "How many can we sustain?" Tarns asked. "I need to know how many people a month's worth of food will support. That decides what reinforcements I should bring." Talion did a quick calculation of consumption for the Dunedain Rangers and the Golden Tree troops. "Aside from those already at the gate, there's enough food to supply one of your 1,000-man units for 2 months." Tarns nodded. "So the main problem is manpower." "Exactly," Talion agreed. "To the east, Lord Bernal and Lord Egon hold their ground. To the west, Lady Millicent and the 2 tall Golden Knights are standing firm. Their presence has kept the line from breaking under this onslaught. If they weren't here, we would have collapsed back into the inner city for desperate close quarters." "I can fix the manpower shortage, but it will take time," Tarns said. "A single 1,000 won't be enough. I'll bring 2 more 1,000-man units. For now, hold the Black Gate for a month. While Melina and I are gone, if you meet a foe you can't handle, notify Bernal immediately. Understood?" Talion pounded his chest with a grin. "Thank you, Lord Tarns. You are always a friend to the Dunedain Rangers." Tarnis pressed Talion's shoulder and then gave Melina a look. Before leaving, she dropped a few warm stones and intoned Golden Tree prayers over the Rangers one last time. Then they went to the runic portal. On the way, Melina asked, "Tarnis, have the soul collectors filled with orc souls?" Tarns patted the 2 small glowing containers at his waist. "Yes, the souls of many orcs, and a few Dunedain who fell on this field, have filled them. I delayed leaving because I worried you couldn't hold the line. Luckily, their assault slackened enough for me to go back and summon more men." They spoke little after that and stepped through the portal. Tarns arrived at the Golden Tree before Melina, planning to continue summoning Rodel's soldiers, but Melina stopped him when she heard the plan. Confused, Tarnis asked, "Do you have another idea, Melina?" "I do," she said. "You told Talion the Black Gate's main shortage isn't fighting power, but manpower, right?" Tarns fell silent and listened. "We don't know how many orc hosts Sauron has thrown against the gate," Melina continued, "but the gate can't hold out forever. Rodel's soldiers might last a month at this pace, but the Dunedain won't. Instead of summoning elite Rodel regulars, who cost many runes, we should summon a vast number of auxiliary troops. They'll be poorer equipped and less trained, but they can carry supplies, fortify the defenses, and fill gaps so more rangers and Rodel warriors can fight." Tarns' eyes lit up. He had relied too much on elite forces and overlooked the urgency of sheer numbers. Melina's plan was practical and economical. "You're right," he said. "We'll summon auxiliaries instead." He reversed his earlier plan and used the precious runes to raise a large auxiliary corps to meet the Black Gate's grinding war of attrition. No sooner had Tarns and Melina gone than the pressure on the walls surged. The orcs' attacks did not weaken. If anything, they grew wilder. Wave after wave battered the battlements like an endless tide. Even the battle-hardened Rodel Legion began to feel it. The air under armor grew heavy. Arms numbed, and every man knew that no matter how many they felled, the enemy's replenishment never slowed. At that instant, the two great tree guardians, towering in golden armor, exchanged a look and found a gap between assaults. One of them turned to Talion, his voice booming through his face guard. "Lord Talion, open the main city gate." Talion's heart leapt. Opening the gate amid a siege seemed suicidal. But the guardian's voice carried a confidence he could trust. After a moment, Talion gave the order. "Open the main gate." The Dunedain rangers nearby trusted him and prized the heavy doors. The gate ground open with a screech, and a golden torrent poured out. The two great tree guardians led the charge, their armored war horses like moving fortresses. They didn't dive into every cluster of foes. They thundered straight for the siege engines that threatened the wall most. Their massive golden halberds cleaved wooden trebuchets and siege towers into splinters, hurling shattered timber and orcs across the battlefield. Rodel knights surged behind them in a compact charge, not to be distracted by common soldiers, but with a single target, the Olog High Square on the Guardian's flank. They chanted in unison as holy sigils flared, and a dozen golden lightning spears shredded the foul air, crashing into the troll horde. Flesh sizzled and burned. The once terrifying formation became a charred ruin. With the objective achieved, the cavalry withdrew in a practiced arc. They turned their flank to the scattered arrows and retreated calmly into the city. The gates slammed shut behind them, sealing the breach. The whole strike took only minutes, swift, brutal, surgical. The battlements fell into an uneasy silence. Talion and the rangers stood stunned. They had seen valor before, but rarely so precise and daring. That feat eased the crisis only briefly. The orcs didn't retreat. They would only abandon the fight if they took the gate. Then the runic portal behind the golden tree pulsed again, and a flood poured out like a released dam. They were not well-equipped Rodel regulars, but a vast tide of auxiliary troops. Simple leather armor, spears, short swords, leather shields, but they moved in neat, practiced formations. Their eyes shone with devotion to the golden tree, and absolute trust in Tarns who had summoned them. For these men, this summons was a command they could not refuse. Tarns found the two great tree guardians and transferred command at once. "Obey the great tree guardians," he called. The guardians knew how to handle such men. One raised his halberd and directed the ranks. The auxiliaries split into teams and surged to the walls. They swarmed the battlements and passages, not claiming glory, but doing the jobs the rangers could no longer sustain. Spears bristled along the parapets to meet climbing orcs. Pairs of them hauled rolling logs and heavy stones, weights that once required elite strength, and shoved them down upon attackers. Others sprinted to the rear to shoulder the back-breaking work of logistics. Arrows, weapons, stones, and medicines began flowing to the front at multiple times the previous rate. More auxiliaries braved stray missiles to drag wounded rangers to safety and carry them to healers. Where exhaustion had left gaps, ranks of leather-armored men now stood shoulder to shoulder. In an instant, a defense line that had been stretched to breaking stabilized under the surge of manpower. The Black Gate, which had been gasping under attrition, found breath again.